everybody. Happy to be here today. Thank you, Microsol, for having us. And yesterday was a big day for us. We released V-Ray For Rhino, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So without further ado, let's get into it. So just a heads up, I have a few scenes queued up here in the background that I'll be switching back and forth between to demonstrate some of the features that we'll be discussing today. We have a lot to go over, and I will try to cover as much of it as quickly as possible. So we've been working hard for years on this new version, and we believe that we struck the perfect balance between ease of use while still maintaining the power that V-Ray has. Of course, core updates to the V-Ray core bring enhancements like speed, which is an amazing benefit out of the box compared to version 2.0. We have a new variable-based adaptive image sampler, which gets rid of the subdiv workflow entirely, which removes a lot of clutter from the technical side of rendering. So with this new version, when we first started designing it, it had to be easy. We found that the barrier of entry for a lot of folks seems to be the learning curve. So we feel like we've addressed that pretty well here. We had a push for quality, and it had to be versatile for any number of industries. So this is to minimize the technical hurdles that come with working in these programs. They are infinitely complex and require a very technical mind more often than not, and we just don't need to add to that. So our goal is to kind of instigate more productivity with less headaches at the end of the day for everyone. This just allows for more design iteration. So it had to also be robust in its tool set, able to take on any job, and built from the ground up for design and visualization. So these are some of the topics that we'll be covering today. Things like the new interface, material creation, conversion with our new quick settings panel. Briefly view the advanced flyout, which isn't necessary to achieve good results, but it is there if you still need the more advanced features that you may be used to using in V-Ray. The material library, that's new, so that's going to be covered in the material section, as well as using environments. What's new with the HDRIs in this version, the simplicity in settings, what that means. Again, just getting out of your way and so that you can design and produce faster. Things like the frame buffer enhancements, and next we'll take all of that and see its applications with a simple architecture scene. And we'll complete our general overview of this version with things like the V-Ray Fur and the Clipper plane. So please keep in mind as we go into this that these are only a sample of the new features, and there's much more that we may be unable to get to today. So at the end, please visit our Rhino site for more details for the full feature set, and I'll leave a link up at the end for that. And don't hesitate to contact Microsol for more information on sales, bundles, etc. So let's get into it. We have a new interface, and the framework for this is based on only showing what's needed in a central column, but still having the ability to access more if needed, and we do that through the left and right flyouts here. So the framework for this is such that the right flyouts kind of open up the full power of V-Ray, while the center panel gives you 90 or 99% of what you need to do a render quickly without having to fidget with a lot of settings that the average person may not know or may not have the time to learn. And that's again going over that perfect balance that we discussed. And then the left flyout here in this particular case was for our new material library preset. So let's switch over to a scene and take a look with a product design scene. Okay, so here I'm in Rhino, and the first thing you'll see is this toolbar. I'm going to go ahead and dock this up in my top right panel here. This toolbar allows us to do several things, like open up the asset editor, kick off various render types. It also allows us to show a frame buffer or select materials for editing in our scene. We have a few more tabs at the top. That's the lights panel, which you may be used to in 2.0. We have the spotlights, the rec lights, the IES lights, dome lights, but the two newcomers are the mesh light and the sphere light here. Let's take a look at the objects panel now. This is where you can drop in an infinite plane, import and export your proxies. Now these two here are very important, they're new, and we'll get to that later in this video. But the last tab here allows us to do things like correct distortions as well as kick off batch rendering. So let's open up and check out the new UI. So I'll do that by clicking the asset editor in our main tab here. And you'll see the user interface pop up. So let's pull this over to the center, and as you can see we have a giant preview swatch, and now we're able to change to different swatch previews based on what kind of shader you're making. So we've got fabric, we've got floors, we've even got subsurface scattering, materials that make it easy for you to see what you're doing. Okay. We also have a new quick settings panel, which we'll get to in a bit. And as mentioned previously, when I open the left flyout here, you can see the material library, and I can pull and drag around panels. These panels will stay as is, so the next time you launch V-Ray, it remembers your preference and you don't have to keep resetting it every time. The right-hand side here, remember what I was saying about more advanced features. So if you're used to 2.0, you can still add layers such as a reflection layer. See the preview swatch update. You can drag and drop those around, or you can still delete them. Okay, and again, the full power of V-Ray is still there under the hood if you need it. So the workflow that we have is going from materials to lights. We have our Rhino documents on here with its settings on the right. Any special geometry like the clipper plane goes in this area here, the geometry list. And here's our new condensed render settings workflow with the new swarm. You can also kick off your production and interactive render types from here as well, and show the frame buffer. Down below, we can reset our settings. If you mess up, if you like what you did, you can save it, or you can open a file from somebody else. So let's head back to the material panels here. Actually, let's head back to the presentation and see what we're going over. So like I just mentioned briefly, materials. So we'll go over the material library with this scene, how to customize and convert materials, as well as working with dome lights for product design using an HDRI. We'll also go over how to set up a backplate instead of just using the standard dome light background. So let's head back into our scene to see how that process works. Alright, so we're here in our asset list, and one of the first things you see, we have a generic material created. So you can right-click this to do a number of things. You can apply it to the selection, apply it to layers, or you can rename. Another way to rename this would be to double-click it, and I'll just go ahead and rename this air piece. Great. And I'll head over to the quick settings. Now, what's cool about the quick settings is, as I change this color here, the preview updates, and I can quickly turn on reflections. I can make it matte versus glossy. You see the preview update, and I can set this back to glossy. Or one of the coolest things we can do now is from this menu here, we can go ahead and select a drop-down to reveal a bunch of presets, and I'll go ahead and select a subsurface scatter preset. And V-Ray intelligently adapts the color to the new swatch that it needs to be in. So it's put that into the subsurface color, which is really cool. Once again, if you need more settings, open up the advanced flyout. You'll see that the world of options is still there for the advanced users who love to tinker. But for 99% of uses, these are the core settings that we've distilled down that gets you great results without any effort. So let's kick off an RT or interactive render here. We'll go ahead and select our earpiece, and I'll just right-click and apply that to the selection, and you'll see the interactive render immediately propagates that change. So the next thing we want to do is look to our new material library to handle the rest of the materials for this. So we have a bunch of categories. I'm in the metal, and I'll scroll down, and actually let's use the search box, and I'll drag in the steel blurry. I'll go ahead and select a portion where I think that'll look good, and once again I'll just right-click and apply to selection. And you'll see that change happen immediately. Now let's keep browsing around to see how we can texture this. So I'll head into the plastic section here, and let's look for something. This looks good. We'll drop that in, and we'll make that the chord material. So I'll just apply that. Let's keep browsing around. I want something with green on it, so this could work. I'll select the shell and I'll apply that material. Now something that you can't see or may not be able to see is that the grain or the bump on this shell is a bit too large. So I'll head over to the quick settings, head over to my bump and click that swatch, and I'll go ahead and change the frequency to 30. Now I have a more natural looking bump to my shell, to my matte plastic. This shiny one, I'm going to drop in here and just apply to the remaining materials. And you'll see that change propagate. Now this is starting to look like something really quickly, and we've only been at this for I think maybe 2 minutes or so. So the next thing we want to do is change this background to use an HDR. So we're done with materials, that's it. So we'll head over to the lights panel here. You see we have our document sun by default, but I can drop in a dome light and change that. You'll see that it pops up asking me, okay, which HDR would you like to use? So I've got one here. I'll go ahead and open that. And you see that it immediately propagates in our frame buffer and shows you that. I want to make some changes to this. So what I can do is select the dome light. Okay, and I'll just start rotating it. And now we've locked the dome light, so you can see as you rotate in the viewport in Rhino, you see the changes immediately in the VRay frame buffer. So it makes for a really natural workflow. I'm going to rotate it to something I like, and this is going to work for me. I have nice highlights at the top and bottom, so that's a great starting point. So I'll maximize this, and we'll open up the panels for the dome light. And we'll just start adjusting some settings here. I want to make this invisible. I just want the illumination, and I want this to be a bit brighter, so let's change this to maybe a value of 5. Yep, that's looking good. So we'll collapse that. Now the next thing I want to do is I've forgotten a material here, so no problem, I'll just head back to the materials, pop open the material library again. Let's make that a metal, and immediately I see this foil blue, so I'll drag that in there. I think that's going to work really well for us, and I'll just apply that to my object. Great. So heading back to lights, just move this over. We want to, be able to actually, before the lights, let's change the backdrop a bit. So let's head to the render settings. We'll scroll down to the environments rollout here. And we'll click the texture swatch on the background, and you'll see by default it's using the Rhino default EXR file. Now, this is good for product design, but we do want a backdrop here, so I'm going to swap this out to just a 16 or 8-bit JPEG. This is not a floating point, this is not an HDR, it's not going to be used for illumination. You can see it comes in, but it doesn't look correct. We want this mapped to the aspect ratio of our scene, so from the UVW settings, I'll change it from spherical to screen. You can see that when I do this, the backdrop image comes in and maps just a frontal projection right to our background. And that's exactly what we want. So the next thing that we're going to take a look at, I started touching on this before, is I'd like to get some more lighting in here. So I just want to push it a bit. So let's go ahead and add some rect lights in here. Go ahead and drag one out. That should do. So you'll see that immediately pop up in our interactive render. And as I push this back, the first thing you'll notice is it's actually facing the wrong way. So what we can do is, before I do that, I'd like to demonstrate how we can change things like the shape of the light. So we'll open up the options in the shape, change it to an ellipse if that's, if that suits what you're working on better. I'll leave this as a rectangle. I'll make it invisible, but remember it's facing the wrong way. So I'll just quickly type flip, in the command line here. So flip, and now our illumination is facing the right direction. So I'll tone this down. I think a value of 30 is a bit much, so we'll try 3. Let's try maybe 5. There we go. So I think it's just a bit of fill, and I think that'll work for our needs here. The next thing I want to do is add a bit of rim lighting. So again, we can take our same light here, and we'll just go ahead and move this window, and we'll alt drag this light to duplicate it. And when I do this, notice in the light list what happens when I release. So the light goes up by 1. It makes a copy of itself so that there's no confusion. And now I can rotate this, and we can see the changes propagate in the frame buffer. Great, so let me position this a bit more. And now you can see we have just enough rim light to where this is becoming an acceptable shot. Okay. Let's see. Let's head back to our slideshow and see what else we have. So next up, we'll take the same scene. So I'll head back to the scene, and we're going to do the render settings for it now. So we'll cover things like exposure, burn value without having to re-render, adjusting white balance, saturation, color balance for cinematic modes can also be adjusted, and maybe adding a custom curve graph which gives you advanced controls just like in Photoshop. And it's all handled within V-Ray, within the frame buffer. There's also support for LUT files, so if you have those on file, you can load those in as well. And let's take a look at what that looks like. Okay, so we're back in our scene. Let's head over to the render settings. And first thing we want to do is, let me maximize this really quickly, is go into our camera settings and adjust the exposure. So I think the scene could be a bit brighter. And let's try a value of 9. There you see it. Let's turn on depth of field. Just a simple toggle, and just to show you the effect, we can crank the defocus up or down. And now we have a pick focal point tool right within the central column. So if I click that and pick an area on my mesh or my geometry, you can see the change in the VFB. I can adjust the defocus amount to control how much depth of field is being shown. I think this is too little, so let's bear with me as I find a value here that works well for us. This is too much, maybe 0.45. Still too much, so let's try 0.4. There we go. That looks good. So once the camera settings are set, the next thing we want to do is set our render output. So we can adjust aspect ratios from here. I think this will look good as a 1-to-1 square. So I'll go ahead and change my resolution to 640. Just let this propagate. Oops. Let me select that and redo that. 640. There we go. Any resolution changes that are made may require a restart to the frame buffer. So I'll go ahead and quickly stop that and restart my interactive. And what this allows me to do is just see a lot more detail. Gives a nicer presentation for this. So let me get this window out of the way here. There we go. So now we can see the bump on the plastic, and it's just a little nicer presentation overall. So once the render settings are done, the next thing you want to do is actually stop the interactive render. I'll turn progressive off because I want to see the buckets when I engage swarm. I'll set my quality to high. And once again, at the bottom here, we have our new swarm feature, so I'll toggle that on. I have network render nodes available to me, and I'll go ahead and click render. So what you'll see is we're using brute force light cache as the default now, and once this finishes propagating the scene, there go the swarm nodes. And you can see the bucket splitting. This is a new feature in 3.0 that is very handy. So once it comes down to the end of a render, the buckets split themselves. So this won't take too long to render. And once this is finished rendering, it will go ahead and do a final cleanup on the frame. So we'll just give that a few more seconds. There. So now we have a clean final render. Now, one of the other things that we can do is, as mentioned, do the post-production work here in the frame buffer. So this icon down here in the bottom left will show the color controls. We can do things like adjust the exposure. So let's brighten this up just a bit more. We can knock down the highlight burn value if there are some hot spots that are blowing out. We can also do things like adjust white balance. I don't think the scene particularly needs that, but it's there. So I'll go ahead and disable this for this scene. What I do want though is to cool off my shadows to give a more cinematic effect. So I'll just play with those. And the final piece of this would be to adjust my curve just to make it a bit more contrasty. And if you have a LUT file, as mentioned before, you can load that here with logarithmic space or not. And that's it. So not very long from start to finish to create our render. So let's head back. Now let's take the same workflows for the product design scene that we did and put them into play with a simple scale model scene for architecture. So please give me a moment to kind of switch scenes here. Okay, just loading it in. All right. So here we have a new scene, and what we're going to do is once again apply what we've done, same workflow with the product design, and see how that applies to architecture. So we'll kick it off by opening up the asset editor here, and we'll launch the interactive render, and you'll see by default it's overblown, so that's okay. We'll knock that back. So what we're going to do is start with the, let's see, we'll enable the V-Ray Rhino sun here, and we'll go ahead and enable that and head over to the environment. Actually, the first thing we want to do is knock down the exposure value so we can see what we're doing. So I'll adjust this to maybe 15. There we go, that's much better. So we'll go into the environment and we'll select the background texture and change this out to be the sky. So we'll scroll down until we see sky here. Now this is the same sky that we just saw in the lights panel that we enabled. So from here we can change the size multiplier to 5. Softens the shadows a bit, and we'll set the ground albedo to something a bit more natural. We'll go back and you'll see those changes update in the interactive render. Now we're set up with a pretty decent base illumination. If you don't have it already, you can go to panels and enable the sun. I have mine over here, so I'll be working with that. So we'll switch on manual control, and now what this is going to enable us to do is adjust the offset of the sun in the sky, as well as the position of the sun. So I have some values written down here that I think could work really well. So let's change this to around 140 and maybe 60. There we go. So this gives us a nice starting point for doing our materials. So we'll head back to the materials now. And we want to create 2 basic materials. Like I said, this is supposed to be kind of a tilt-shift scale model stylized scene. So what I'll do is just drag this into position here. Okay, and from this menu under here, we'll create the Add Material menu. We'll create a generic material. And this is where all materials get created, or where they start. Now this generic material, I'm going to go ahead and rename it by right-clicking, hit rename, and then we'll call this masses. Let's head over to the quick settings. Nothing too complicated. We just want this to be a bit brighter, and we want to add some reflection so that we get some glossiness values going. So we'll drop it down just to here with the glossiness and return to our materials list. We want to make another material, so we'll find another generic material here, and this time I'll double click to rename that and call that trees. So we'll head over to the quick settings panel. Again, nothing too complex. We'll just drop that down for contrast, and that's it. So let's head back to the material list. We'll right click, apply material, trees layer. Do the same thing for masses. We'll go ahead and apply that to the masses layer. There. Now you can see that basic glossiness kicking. So let's look to the categories here to texture that center building. So let's go with ground first, and let's find an asphalt here that we like. Now I've worked with this asphalt before, and for this particular scene I know that we need to adjust the scale. So I'm here in this texture swatch, and I'm just going to go into the UVW channel and set this to a value of 50. That's one of the cool things of the new version here. We can actually right-click this swatch and copy it and paste it into other channels, or we can drag it. So I'm just dragging right now and releasing, and now that's copied to the reflection channel as well. I'll go ahead and copy that again and paste it for the bump. And then we'll go over to the materials list. We'll right-click and apply that to our road layer. All right, so let's keep on texturing this. We'll go to concrete. Let's find one that can work. Let's do this one here. I'll just drag that. Okay, and I'll go ahead and right-click again and apply this to one of the layers we have here. So let's see what we have. Foundations. Perfect. Let's go over to the library again, grab another concrete. Not that one. Let's apply this one. So once again, we're going to apply this to another one of our layers. We'll apply it to floors. Great. So there's a lot of glass on this building. So I'll head here, and this time I'll use our search for black glass. And immediately that pulls up tinted. I like that, so I'm going to use it. And I'll just right-click and apply it to the windows layer. It's looking good. There's a lot of window frames around that glass though, so I think we can accentuate the glass by giving the frames that same steel blurry metal that we used in the product design scene. So I'll just search for it. I'll just drag that in, and then I'll go ahead and apply that to the frames. And what we should see here is that it kind of makes the building pop out a bit more. Perfect. And that's it for materials. Really simple. Again, the material library can be edited. It's very quick. So let's head to the render settings now. We'll go to the camera settings and turn on depth of field. Same workflow as product design. We'll adjust the defocus amount. Remember, we want that tilt shift look. So I think a value of around 0.8 could work really well. We'll pick our focal point using this tool and select some geometry on the building. Okay. After we do that, we'll set our resolution. Now for this, I need a custom aspect ratio. So I'll select custom, and I just so happen to know that I'd like a 0.8 aspect width on this. I'm going to set my width, so this will give me a render that is more tall than wide, so 480 by 600. Once again, I'll just really quickly restart my interactive render. Let's go ahead and minimize that. Okay. So this is looking pretty good. So what we can do next is this new feature here, aerial perspective. We can just toggle that on, and you can see immediately it gives us a very moody look. Now, what we should be doing is selecting the sun that we already have in the scene to stick with the illumination that we've set. So now it gives kind of a foggy or smoggy scene, and it's too much, so we can increase this to maybe around 85,000. We don't want it coming into the city too much, and I like the illumination, so I'll uncheck the effect background so I can keep my sky. So now it's a very, very subtle effect, but it goes a long way. Once again, this is looking pretty good. So I'll go ahead and take off the interactive render at this point. We want to see our buckets, and I'll increase high, turning swarm on. And then we'll go ahead and kick off our production render. Very simple, very easy. It's just a matter of sliding and turning toggles on and off. So it's a lot more streamlined and powerful. We'll just give this a second here to kick in. So once again, there's the light cache coming into play, and the buckets. So one of the cool things about the post-production enhancements, so I'll click this icon, is that you don't need to wait for the render to finish to do this. So while it's going, I'll go ahead and change the exposure, so I'll increase this a bit. You see the buckets are just finishing up there, but I can make the adjustments I need while it's going without having to re-render. So we'll take the burn value down, and then we'll go ahead and this scene, I'd like to warm it up a bit, so we'll increase this to around 7,000. We'll, again, just a very, very subtle cinematic look for this. So you can see, even when I toggle this on and off, it's super, super subtle, but I feel like it goes a long way. Last step is to play with our curves, the same workflow as product design. And there you go. So really quick, really easy, about 10 minutes, and we have a render from start to finish. So let's go back here and take a look at the next topic. So geometry. So I've got another scene queued up, so please, while I'm loading that up, I'll just kind of see, we want to quickly go over two very important new additions in this version. That is the clipper plane, as we mentioned when we were going over the UI, and the fur. So let me pull up that scene really quickly. Okay. Here we are. So I want to get into addressing lighting exteriors with HDRIs before I actually get into the fur. So we'll head over to the lights, and you'll see we have our Rhino documents on here. And this is what it looks like. Really simple, really basic. You can see it's enabled, so the very first thing we want to do is actually disable it. Now we still have illumination coming from different sources, so we'll head over to the render settings. The environment will disable that as well. We don't need that contributing. And we still have illumination, so we'll take off the aerial perspective. So now we have a perfect starting point. We have zero illumination in our scene for the HDRI image. So we'll head over and add a dome light into the scene. And once again, when I click, it's going to ask me, hey, which image do you want to use? I've got one queued up here. And there's our HDRI completely lighting our scene. We'll adjust the intensity of this. I think maybe a value of 3 could work well. And again, just like product design, we can take it and rotate it, and you'll see the background rotate and update accordingly. So I'll just rotate it until I find something really quickly that works for us. Okay, you'll see we have an ocean in the back. That's actually special geometry as well. That's an infinite plane. And we're going to add some more special geometry in here. And to do that, we need to click where we want to apply our grass. So you'll see we have these group materials here, or group geometry. And we'll click on fur. And you'll see, bam, immediately it's a forest. And the fur object populates in our geometry list. So let's go ahead and tweak these settings now to get the look we want. So the first thing is let's adjust the length. So I think 0.006 will be good, and the thickness, let's try actually this should be 0.006. And the length, just for demonstration purposes, let's increase that again so we can see what's happening. So maybe 0.1. Let's try 1. There. So now we have a bit taller levels of grass. So we want to increase the density, so that's done with the per area, and I'll set this to 200. And when I set that, you'll see that our grass becomes a lot more dense. Now that we have a dense patch of tall grass, we can go back to our length setting and we can, adjust that down until it's at a more normal level. Okay, there we go. Now texturing grass, you can use the V-Ray hair material. In this case, we're actually going to go back to our material library again to do that. So there are two things you want to texture. Let's pop open the library here and scroll down to the ground category. There it is. And we'll select a grass that we like. So I'll choose this one. I'll right click on that and apply it to the ground geometry that we have, but you'll notice the grass is still not textured. So to do that, we'll select in viewport. I just right clicked, and we'll go back and assign the grass to this temporary object or this spatial object here in the viewport. Now the interactive render updates and our grass has a texture, and that's working with fur. So one of the other special objects we have now is the V-Ray clipper plane. And to do that, we'll just add the clipper plane from the V-Ray Objects tab. And like the fur, you'll immediately see a very large kind of placeholder piece of geometry popping. Now let's get my quad view here and just kind of line this up. You'll see in the interactive preview how it's already started to clip. I'm trying to let's move this over and move this up. Okay, now you'll see when that updates how it's clipping off everything. We can maximize, we can go into a clipper view here to better see these results. And we can flip the direction on this so that it only clips down. Now the problem with this is we're clipping down in the right direction now, but if I push this too low, it's going to start clipping into everything. And that may not be what you're after. So you'll see once this refreshes, you see how it just clips through the foundation, the base, the land, everything. So we can adjust that by going into the include list and only including the building. And you'll see now it doesn't matter where our clipper plane falls, it will go ahead and only clip the building. So we can move that up and down now and see various clip levels for the building. Now it's very important that your geometry has a name on it for it to show up in that list. So here we've named it building in the Rhino properties, and you see building shows up in that list for include and exclude. You can also do things like, we'll head back to the presentation here, but you can also do things like adopt the material that's being clipped, show that material, or make your own custom material and show that as your cross-section cutaways. So here we see from our release video yesterday a more robust scene using that clipper plane in action. So let's talk a bit about online licensing. Previously we used hardware licensing with dongles, and now we use online licensing. So this makes it easier to manage licenses and workstations. Each workstation license comes with a single render node license, and this is a universal license as mentioned before, so you can use your render node license to render with other V-Ray compatible host applications. So here's the pricing available for V-Ray for Rhino. Please don't hesitate to contact Microsol again for information on monthly and yearly rentals, any special bundle offers, and other questions. There were a lot of features that we couldn't get to today. There's the mesh lights. We have HDR light, studio support, Grasshopper integration. We have the new denoiser, probabilistic lights, GGX shaders, and just an absolutely massive amount more. So please visit our Rhino page for more information. You can also visit the docs page to get caught up on what's new or how to use new features in this new version of V-Ray for Rhino. And if you're looking for quick start videos and whatnot, the Chaos Group TV YouTube channel should keep you up to date on that also. Also, be sure to download a trial and hop on our forums if you have not already.